Good afternoon, everyone. It's coming up to 3 o'clock now, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar. And today we have Jessie James, who's joining us from the States, and I'm going to run you through the usual drill that if you've any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will monitor those and talk them through during, middle, and then most of all at the end. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Nicola Dorn, who will introduce Jessie today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emer. Hi, Jessie. Great to see you here. Thanks a million for coming. So I wanted to just introduce everyone to Jessie. Many of you will have heard of him. We've been talking about Shop Object for quite some time here with many of you. Jessie is a co-founder of both Shop Object and a business called Aesthetic Movement, which is a very diverse design business based in the States that in many ways is something that we would love to have here because it represents an awful lot of small makers and independent designers based all over the States and helps them get to market as well as developing their own products and events. Out of that, with a couple of other like-minded people, he developed Shop Object, which is probably the newest and most independent trade show we've come across in the US, and it's just incredible. The curation and consideration that has gone into that show is fantastic. We exhibited last year and really enjoyed it, and we're so impressed. So we're delighted to have him here today just to talk about what's happening in the US and in retail and in design, and get a sense for where things are moving. So Jessie, thanks a million for coming and joining us.
Well, thank you, Nicola and Emer, and it's great to be here. It's morning time here in New York, where I am upstate, but I really appreciate all of you taking part of your afternoon to hear me wax on about things that I like to talk about. Yes, to kind of give a little bit more background based on what Nicola shared. We did meet leading up to the Shop Object show that they participated in, we had a Design Ireland showcase at, and then I had the pleasure of coming to your show, I guess last February, or maybe it was January.
January, yeah.
But I'll give a little bit of a background on Aesthetic Movement and Shop Object to just kind of fill in a few gaps there, and then talk about the topic of the day, advocating the extraordinary. So Aesthetic Movement is a creative consultancy and design firm that also represents brands to retailers throughout the US and abroad. I founded Aesthetic Movement in 2009. I had been a partner in a showroom that was based on the West Coast that I took national, where we represented brands to retailers throughout the US and had showrooms in San Francisco and in New York. And I built that over 14 years, and in 2009 really wanted to expand to not only represent brands but also do in-house design work and take on other kinds of projects that felt related to that world. So Aesthetic Movement was born in 2009, and to this day represents about 40 brands at any given time. We tend to represent, small to mid-size designers, makers, manufacturers, many of whom we've worked with for a decade. And we are the liaison between those brands and designers and the retailers throughout the US that carry their products. And again, in some cases, we do manage accounts outside of the US as well. What we did with Aesthetic Movement that was different than the representation company I had been a partner in before that was we also began doing creative consultancy. So that could be working with brands in creating their branding, naming, art directing their product development, catalog shoots, creating the materials, and in some cases really creating brands from scratch. Often we would find that we knew great partners in the world who were good at making things, but were in need of an aesthetic direction. And we often found that the best way for us to create new product was to really just find a wonderful source to make high quality product and then work back into their capabilities. So we launched many brands from that perspective. And those brands are either a part of our showroom, like Sir Madam, that's one of the brands that we created in-house and still do all of the design work for today. And then other brands that really just hire us for certain elements of the work. And in addition to that, Aesthetic Movement does other kinds of projects. We do retail design projects, probably one a year or so. We designed 3 Fred Segal stores in Tokyo, in Daikanyama. We worked with a great retailer in Tampa, Florida called Oxford Exchange in creating their very exciting 22,000 square foot space that incorporates a restaurant and coffee house and bookstore and retail space, and then also a private commerce club upstairs, which is a pretty exciting project. We developed a store in Brooklyn called Regular Visitors that we're partners in that focuses on everyday points of contact. Go in to get your New York Times, get your cup of coffee in the morning, and also buy sort of the best quality basics, housewares, etc. Right on a corner by a subway stop in a great neighborhood in Brooklyn. So we like to take on various projects that relate to this world that we're in. And we have showrooms in Atlanta and Las Vegas, where major market centers here take place twice a year, where we see a lot of our customers. And then, of course, all of our brands are part of Shop Object, which I'll talk about next, which is the trade show that we began in 2018. Leading into that a little bit, I'll share that, oh, there's Edie. Oh, Edie passed away recently. Oh. That's our head of security. That was Renata, one of my longtime coworkers and friends, who is the head of sales for Shop Object now. That was her sweet Edie. So we, as Aesthetic Movement, participated in trade shows throughout the US from our inception, and certainly for all of the time that, you know, from the day we launched, we were participants in New York Now, which was, is the big trade show at the Javits Center in New York, probably one of the largest trade shows in the US, and had previously been called NYIGF, the New York International Gift Fair, was rebranded at a certain point, was bought by a larger trade show company after having been a kind of a family-run trade show for years. And so after 20 some odd years of participating in that show in my previous business and then as Aesthetic Movement, we landed in a place where we had the largest footprint in the show, and we were, you know, spending a lot of money to participate there, and ultimately, starting in around 2015, really felt like something was changing. The dynamic of the show, the things that were so valuable in the early days of my participation in it, when this section that we were a part of called Accent on Design, which is a juried section of the show, was really exciting and wonderful. That had started to just not feel the same. It didn't feel like the quality of the experience for exhibitors or buyers was quite what it once had been. We were certainly seeing a dip in participation, fewer people coming to the show, fewer people writing orders, things that I think we've all experienced in various ways, but there was maybe a lack of a sense of recognition of it happening and what to do about it. And we had ideas and thoughts, and I think for quite a while we found ourselves sort of saving face, saying to our fellow exhibitors, you know, good show, good show. The numbers worked out in the end. A little slower than usual, but yeah, it was good in the end. Just kind of trying to keep up that general sense of positivity while we all recognized something was happening. And then at the last show that we did there, we just sort of all finally recognized and were willing to admit that it just wasn't right anymore. I think we were starting to see more and more unsold space and pipe and drape sort of getting closer to our location, which had always been sort of a prime spot that we'd occupied for a long time. And just feeling like we had to do something different. It just felt necessary to change the model a little bit. So I started to hear dialogue and have conversations with seminal brands that were a part of the show about maybe taking a season off. A couple people talked about maybe renting a hotel room and showing their product that way. A few people talked about maybe gathering together and trying to find some kind of an alternative space. And I just sort of felt like as a company that had 40 brands, that was a pretty good start. And I reached out to an old friend of mine, Minya Quirk, someone I had met in a book club many years prior and had always kept in touch with. She and her business partner, Deirdre Maloney, were the founders of a trade show called Capsule, which is in the apparel space. There's Capsule Men's and Women's, and they grew that to be quite a large entity. And the day that I called them was the day that they were sort of toasting each other, celebrating the sale of their show and looking forward to a small period of retirement. And I said, hey, do you guys want to start a trade show in the gift space? And they said, call us crazy, but sure, let's do it. And so we did. We started in this building that you're looking at a picture of right now. It was 100 vendors, and it was a really exciting launch. And by the second season, we had a second location. We were at over 200 vendors. And by the third season, third show, we were in the space that we're occupying now at Basketball City, Pier 36, at over close to 500 vendors. So it grew pretty quickly. But what we realized was that we were able to capture within this space that experience that we felt was missing, where you could have really seminal design brands that were recognized worldwide, like Vitra, like Areaware, like Hey, alongside makers that work in small studios with just themselves or others, glass blowers, ceramicists, textile designers from all across the US and around the world. We launched with, at the new space with an exciting showcase of products from Japan, as well as a great showcase of products from Ireland, really wanting to just focus on the marriage of great design and high quality production methods, and really kind of create a space where buyers who were of a mind to really seek out the best were going to be able to come to a place where they could have real conversation and dialogue with people who actually create and design things, where buyers and makers could know each other by name, could really socialize and engage, have some fun, and really put together great collections of product. We just felt like the whole experience of trade shows, after years and years of doing them, had started to feel like a job instead of that thing that, you know, we really enjoyed. We felt like we had gotten to a place where going to shows was the least exciting part of the year. It was something that we dreaded instead of looking forward to it. And we didn't want that to be the case anymore. I mean, this is what we all do for a living. This is what we have chosen to make our lives doing. And it felt like we could do our best to try to inject some positivity into that experience and love our work again. And that really was the goal of launching Shop Object. So, I mean, I think all of this sort of brings me to just the kind of general concept of advocating the extraordinary. I think what was written down here as the long form of today's talk was how advocating the extraordinary is demonstrating agility, strength, and diversity through COVID and beyond. Pretty big topic. I'm not sure I'll be able to fully outline all of the things that sort of pertain to that, but I think that we definitely were on a certain trajectory before our world got turned upside down by leaving this bigger show in 2018 and starting this new show with the focus of kind of maybe making our world a little smaller again, feeling like in many ways everything had just gotten too big, too outsized, too focused on cost competitiveness, tightening those margins, bigger retail, bigger opportunities. So many businesses that I'd seen over the years get one fat order from a chain that was in their minds going to change their life and ultimately broke them, either because that company went belly up and didn't pay their bill, or really just took one season out of them and then sort of deserted them in the second season after they'd ramped up and hired people or come up with, you know, new production methods to try to meet the needs of that larger order. There were just too many experiences where it felt like chasing that larger approach to business was detrimental to the health of a designer or a maker of product, and that we had lost touch with that connectivity and that real sense of enjoyment and engagement. And so we were on this path by creating Shop Object to kind of make our world a little smaller and tighter again. We were already seeing that, you know, there probably was a period where there were too many, at least in the United States, too many retailers, too many stores, too many people opening shops and doing a version of the same thing. And as stores began to close, I think there was a real nervousness around that. But for me, that's always been a real sign of opportunity to focus acutely on doing your very best. We don't need to have as many stores if the stores that we do have are truly unique and exciting, and if the products that we're presenting are extraordinary, and if people are really making their best work. I feel like there's a, you know, there's a lot of people out there in the world of, you know, shopping Amazon or big box stores or chain stores that really want to just get as much out into the world as possible. And in my experience, that's just not something that I care to compete with or try to, that's a game I don't want to play. I'm much happier working with retailers who maybe they're independent stores, maybe they're small chains, maybe they're specialty chains, but ultimately their focus is really on doing something unique, merchandising product beautifully, selecting things that they have an eye for and that work together well, and that tell a story. And I've always been, you know, really focused largely on brick and mortar businesses, and that's certainly the way I like to shop. I love to shop. I love to go into spaces that really make me feel like I've been transported in some way, where I feel like I'm really discovering things. Even if I'm seeing product that I've seen other places, I might be seeing it in a new light. It may be validated by the fact that I'm seeing it in this extraordinary space. So that's kind of where we were. And then we were hit by this world pandemic that has forced us all to hole up for 3 months now. And certainly we are collectively challenged on a level that was unanticipated, both financially, our ability to work in traditional ways, all of that. And so I don't want to in any way downplay the immense challenges that that has created for our company, our businesses, our designers, the retailers that we work with, probably many of you. But I also am wanting to focus on the message that's come out of this, this moment that we're all living through. and this sense that there isn't time to waste, and that we really need to do our best to think about what it is we want out of life, what it is we want to be doing and making, particularly as people working in the design and craft space, and focusing on doing the very best work and creating the very best product and allowing things to cost what they really cost, not what the world says they should cost. In a competing economy, I think it's really hard to deny that, you know, many people have been the world over improperly compensated for the work that they've been doing for a long time. And I understand that, you know, it's challenging for everyone to sort of work in this same space from an economic standpoint, but ultimately, you know, this audience, the people that are here as part of this dialogue today, we're in this retail / design / craft space. And there really is an opportunity now to, I think, just create exceptional work and allow that to be what we put out into the world. And I feel like that's been a strong message I'm hearing from people within our larger shop object community, certainly among the brands that I work with. Maybe slowing down a bit, maybe not feeling like those goals of doubling, tripling, quadrupling business and hiring more and more people are as logical today as they might have seemed a few years ago, but really focusing on quality and putting our best efforts out there, and recognizing that, you know, the world will not be empty of stores. They will always exist, and the best ones will survive. And the other thing that's really exciting is how much newness comes out of moments like this. You know, we're still seeing applicants coming into our show, which was postponed from August to October of this year. And we've also just launched Shop On, which is a digital marketplace that will be a year-round marketplace for brands that will be launched by this virtual show, which will happen in late August, but then will continue on for registered buyers to buy products and place orders and communicate directly with exhibitors and makers throughout the year. But in seeing the amount of people coming forward to apply to participate in our show or on the virtual platform, it's clear to me that there are new businesses being born right now, today. There are people coming out of design school, people coming out of apprenticeships that are excited to put their best into the world, and certainly retailers who are focused on you know, rethinking how they approach their business. So many of the small independent retailers that we've worked with obviously had to do online sales over the last couple of months, and maybe that wasn't their focus before, but it certainly became an important focus. Many of them did very well, particularly in the home space, kitchen, in the spaces, the rooms that we've all been occupying while we've been locked down. And they are now going to be incorporating their ability to communicate and their vision online while also reopening their physical spaces. And I think that it's just a time to really focus on quality and best efforts to create the thing that is most unique, most exciting, to keep those old traditions alive, as well as introduce new design concepts into the world, but not chase that sort of common denominator, and really focus on extraordinary products at this time, and extraordinary retail and presentation. Again, less of it maybe than there was 5 years ago, but just better. So that's kind of my basic philosophy. It's probably been my philosophy for quite a while, but I spent many years dabbling in the the challenge at hand to kind of, make things as big as possible. I certainly spent years working with very large chain retailers, which I still do to a certain degree, but I think when a larger chain retailer is coming to our world, they're looking for things that are probably just in their top tier stores, that are kind of representative of their connection to the future and their focus on design. But in general, I've always just believed that, it's okay to put things out there that are a little unique, that are a little unorthodox, that are a little less traditional, that are of high quality, that maybe are a little more expensive than you think people are comfortable with. But I think we're all sort of learning something through this period. What does it really cost to make things and to have things of quality? And we're sort of learning that maybe less is more, but let's just focus on having the best options when we do choose to bring something into our lives.
And
so I'm going to stop talking for a bit. Hopefully there's a question or two out there.
Okay, we have a question. We have a question for you. You're a wonderful advocate of, you need to pay for the quality and the craftsmanship of the piece. And would you be suggesting to our audience that they seek out like-minded beings to you with similar value structures to sell their work? Or would you have hints to say, how do I actually command the proper price for my work without being devalued?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that the first thing is really looking at your own assortment and understanding what it looks like and what you're making and what the focus is. So, when I visited the show in Dublin, I saw a great diversity of product. And I saw people that were making really extraordinary things that, that could have come from any corner of the world, but ultimately were just, design-focused objects and items, as opposed to some things that felt like they were part of the clear traditions of Irish craft, and then things that felt maybe geared more towards a souvenir culture, apparel, all kinds of things. I mean, there was certainly great diversity there, but I think that, within the space, the sort of design showcase that I experienced front and center, there were so many people that were really making extraordinary work, that was at a level that, if more people around the world laid eyes on them, some of those brands were showing in that trade show exclusively or participating through group events and other shows. But it is about making that connection, finding the right retailers that are going to understand and be willing to bring your work in. One of the things that's been challenging for years in the US is, I would say a few years ago, there were many retailers that were uncomfortable buying goods that were not warehoused in the United States. There was the sense that unless the goods were warehoused here, it was too great an effort, too challenging to import, to have to deal with customs and duties and the possible things that could go wrong there. And I've really sort of seen a turn there, because I think a lot of the best retailers recognize that in order to have high quality product that maybe is less familiar to their customer base, they might have to look a little further afield, and they have to be willing to wait a little longer for production. A lot of people are taking orders and then making the goods these days, as opposed to, having stock sitting in a warehouse somewhere, and be willing to bring them in. I encourage people among this audience to really have a tight system for shipping internationally. If you can build in the cost of shipping to the wholesale cost so that you take away that conceptual barrier, that's a good thing. If you can certainly manage making sure that the product is going to be door to door, those kinds of things will be super beneficial. But yes, you have to connect to that audience that is going to be willing to recognize the cost of goods. And it's, it's a smaller audience than I think people imagine, I've spent many years working with European brands who think of the US economy and retail landscape as massive. And yes, it is massive. But when you get down to this kind of design element, this core quality design lifestyle retailer space, it is not massive. It is big, but it's smaller than people imagine. And so one of our goals with Shop Object was to really connect the best stores, the stores that are really focused on high quality, design driven product, and the people making those products. It's not necessarily a show for everyone. It is a show that some might come to for inspiration, but most people are coming to buy. And it's really about putting those like-minded people together. And you know, if you can't make those connections, you can't really do business. You need to be able to make those connections. So I do think that, you know, the first thing is to look at your own product assortment and figure out what you're putting out into the world. Are you competing in a space that has a lot of other competition? Are you making something that lots of other people are making and you're trying to just give a slightly better price for it or do something slightly different? That's a complicated place to be right now. I think the best thing is to just have, depending on what you're making, really unique collections of product, focus on your best work, and then make sure that it's properly marketed and seen by the right people. Absolutely.
Excellent. I have one here. What or who does Jessie see as the customer stroke end user for the new concept products that you developed? And could you map out the route to find them?
The customer's an end user for Shop On specifically, do you think? Or do you think this is related to just the concept of?
I think it's the concept of the products.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that when I think of the retailers that I know of domestically here in the States and then in other parts of the world that are maybe the most press-worthy, the most exciting, the ones that I am excited to hear about when they open up. They are stores that might not be in major cities all the time. They might be in small towns where people are trying to find a more affordable way to do something really new and interesting. And they are focused on creating a unique experience. I think that, you know, to be honest, Shop Object is a good place to find a lot of them because we are really working to appeal to those customers. So our audience is made up of those kinds of stores in the US. I think that it's important to make sure that your sales materials are representative of high quality, that your way of presenting, I mean, it's going to be hard to make these connections without good digital assets these days. I think it's super critical that your imagery can communicate what you're doing and that the copy that you write about your products will truly communicate what's unique and interesting about what you do specifically, making sure that you have the highest quality materials either through your website or through digital assets that you're sharing. That's critical these days. I mean, honestly, when people apply to our shows or when we are looking at new brands or considering product in any way, we're inundated with people sharing materials. And what's the first thing that we look at? The images. Like, what does this look like? Does it catch our attention immediately? Is there something about the experience of opening up this document or going to this website? Do I feel like I'm seeing something unique and special and extraordinary? And then you dig in a little further. If you like what you see, you start to read. You start to look at, you know, the details of what this company is about, who the designers are, where it's made, how it's made, what the philosophy is. And then you go even deeper to see maybe where they're retailing or what the prices look like. But the first thing is that visual experience of what you're looking at. So I think everyone has to invest thoughtfully in creating strong materials that represent the ethos of their brand, the vision that they're creating. And again, I saw a lot of that when I visited the show. Certainly very unique brands that were exciting to me and new discoveries to me, which is always the most exciting thing, the most fun to find something that you haven't seen in the world before. So I would say that that's the first step. And then communicating that through your own website. Having a wholesale marketplace is important, particularly if people are going to be traveling less and going to fewer trade shows. I think budgets will be cut back for a while. So with Shop On, what we've done is we've created a wholesale e-commerce space for those that do not have their own, or as an aggregate for people who want to be discovered and found in a space where like-minded individuals will be shopping and existing. A lot of the brands that work with us, bigger brands, the ones that are a bit more international in scale, certainly have their own e-commerce wholesale platforms, yet they're also participating in ours because of the editorial content that we will be bringing through to help connect people to products, either through color stories or themes or focuses on a country or a material, just ways to keep it exciting, to keep that sense of discovery constantly happening. So I do think that, frankly, you know, as a brand, if you are an Irish brand that is producing goods that you are showing locally, thinking about what trade shows you want to be traveling to in other countries, if your goal is to bring your product to other parts of the world. And if you're not going to do that many, finding a platform like Shop On, and I'm really not here to sell, but is you know, it was designed specifically to make connections between thoughtful buyers and thoughtful makers. And then really think about how you're going to make the experience of selling your product and delivering it to doors that are a little further afield as easy and you know, friendly to the retailer as possible.
Good.
Jessie, you hit on a really valid thing there, and it really struck me when we went to see Shop Object, is that consistency. Because the one thing I noticed when I walked into the show was from the way you were welcomed at the, you know, at the desk when you arrived, through to the layout of the show, through to the food, the music, everything felt considered, everything felt curated, and everything felt on message. And from what you're saying there, it's just as important for our brands to be thinking that way, that there's consistency in every way that they get their message out and that it fits with wherever they decide to exhibit, be it online or offline.
Yes. Yes, I mean, so I remember years ago having a conversation with someone I worked closely with who was a very, very talented graphic designer. And she was working on her space. She'd moved into a new home and she felt like she wanted some advice, wanted to run some things by me, and just felt completely disconnected from how to deal with a physical space. And it totally shocked me because in my mind, if you're an aesthetically minded person, this was a very talented graphic designer, I didn't understand how she couldn't translate that same skill set to a physical space or understanding a room. And I realized that, you know, we all have different ways of communicating and different skill sets, but ultimately what a retailer has to do today is think about what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it smells like, how it feels, what the vibe is, what the you know, trajectory of walking around the store is. You have to think about every part of that experience. And so I think as makers of product, it behooves you to do the same, to really be thinking about what world you want your product to be in. I think that, again, there's probably been a tendency in the sort of period that we're coming out of, you know, the past 10 years of wanting to create things that could sort of fit lots of different needs. Well, what do you want it to be? How do you want it? You know, you want a little of this? I'll get that for you. I'll make a little of this for you. I don't think that's what we're about right now. I think right now it's sort of just figuring out what you do best. Who are you? What is your product? And then where does that want to exist? What world do you want those products to live in? And then finding those connections. So it's really being a little bit more pointed rather than too broadly expansive, I think is the best way to look at it. So if you can really pinpoint the core sensibility of yourself and your product and your company and your brand and what you're making, and then envision a home for it, and then really touch upon all the elements of what that experience should look and feel like, and tell that story. Maybe it's really telling the story of your workshop. Maybe it's spending some time putting a thoughtful, well-edited video together that's really showing people where you make your stuff and who the people making it are and what it's like to go there every day, and letting people have a little bit of that experience of having a piece of that by bringing your product into their lives. That's what we all want right now. We want to kind of understand a little deeper where things that we live with come from.
Thank you. We have a question. I think it's more a clarification than anything. One of our audience said that you described a category as Irish craft as against international or souvenir.
So I think what I mean there is that, you know, for instance, when I went to the show and I see crystal and there's, you know, a tradition of crystal glassware that one thinks of as being a part of what Ireland has done for years, or certain textiles. Irish linen is something that, you know, people are familiar with. So things that you, from an international perspective, think of as traditionally Irish crafts or materials, even done in very modern ways, but just materials that, or, you know, knits, things like that, that just, you know, as someone growing up in Chicago, and I'd never been to Ireland before this trip, I feel like I'm familiar with it conceptually as being crafts that were traditional to Ireland. And then, and granted, that may or may not be entirely true, but certainly that's the perception. And I did learn quite a bit about some of those traditions and the ways in which they've sort of, you know, ebbed and flowed. And, you know, it was interesting to me to learn that a lot of the woolens that I was seeing at the show were made of wool that was coming from other countries. And that, you know, is just a reality these days. But then I was also seeing products. There was a designer of decorative resin pieces. There was nothing about the material or the design sensibility that in any way screamed Irish to me. You know what I mean? It didn't, in and of itself, look like product that was necessarily tied to what I think of as the traditions of you know, product developed in Ireland. And again, you know, that may or may not be true. I think resin is a relatively new material anyway. So it's not necessarily something that any country has years and years of history making. But I think that that's what I mean. I think that there's some truth to the fact that when you are buying things that are from France, you might have some preconceived notions of a French sensibility, a Provençal sensibility, you know, lavender sachets, whatever it might be, and they might be beautifully done. And as you know, people in America importing things from other places, sometimes you want that sense that's steeped in tradition. But other times you're just seeing really wonderful, truly exciting design coming out of any corner of the world. And there is no preconceived notion as to, you know, what the traditions of that place are and how they feed into that product.
Okay, so basically the story is that the unique, the well-made, and the beautiful piece, it transcends all boundaries. borders.
Yeah, and I'm not making a case for things that feel traditional or not. I mean, I think that both directions are really exciting, but just doing the best version of it is the thing to do. And you know, I definitely think that there is immense value in keeping older traditional. One thing that's really interesting to me about many parts of the world, this is different than the US because the US doesn't really have this tradition as much anymore, but you know, towns, cities, communities, counties, places specializing in a certain craft. Those are things that are really important to keep alive. One case of that I can think of here that was a new knowledge for me was one of the brands that exhibits at Shop Object that is based in Rhode Island, our smallest state, where unbeknownst to me, there was a real strong tradition of pewter production. I didn't know that Rhode Island was where a lot of the old pewter mills, factories, I'm not sure what you call it, foundries maybe, the pewter made in a foundry. But that was something that was dying, and this brand that exhibits with us really wanted to keep that tradition alive. The products that they're making are not necessarily traditional in design. They're quite modern in design, but they're working in these spaces that have been around for years and that were kind of, you know, dying out. So I definitely think that keeping older traditions alive and making sure that those things that that have existed for a long time don't disappear. But also, you know, I mean, a lot of people coming out of design schools, if you're in industrial design or thinking about complex new materials or working with things in a way that's very sympathetic to the environment. There are lots of new, exciting ways to create product as well. So I'm certainly not advocating for one traditional versus modern, because both are totally necessary. It's just, I'm advocating for, you know, making the best, most exciting, most unique version of things that you can, rather than feeling like you have to sort of create things for that common denominator, if that makes any sense.
Good, good.
And Jessie, just one quick one that you touched on there. One of the things that struck me at Shop Object when we were there was the amount of conversations that were happening. It was fantastic to see, and how much listening that was happening in terms of particularly the brands that were presenting. A lot of the visitors, the buyers, the influencers, they were already very knowledgeable about the process of the making a lot of the time. They were asking the questions around the history, the inspiration, you know, where it was made, why it was made, all of those. And that's a lovely thing to do face to face. But obviously with COVID, we have less opportunity for that at the moment. How do you feel we're going to replace that? I know obviously you guys have put this platform out there now, but is it something that longer term our brands are going to have to look at ways of keeping in touch with their buyers on a more consistent basis than they may have had to do before?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what we're excited for is introducing this new platform as an addition to our physical gatherings. Clearly, our hope is that later this year, or if it doesn't end up happening this October, by February, which is the next scheduled show, we will be back in each other's company again. But we already felt that there was a need to feel connected in between shows. I think a lot of brands are excited by introducing product as they've come up with something. You know, if you come up with a new, there used to be this mad rush to try to get everything locked into these 2 seasons in the gift home space per year. I know apparel traditionally has a lot more than that, but we feel like there's an opportunity to keep that engagement going by introducing new things mid-season, telling editorial stories. We're going to look to our brands within the shop object world to create editorial on the shop on marketplace that keeps people engaged and excited all the time. And in order to do that, we need great materials coming to us from our brands. We need to pull great imagery. We need video content that we can share, that we can work into our editorial stories. And then we will be creating things through Q&As, through talks, through other kinds of engagement that will allow people to stay connected. But absolutely, we are all, like it or not, living in this digital age that, you know, part of me thought for a really long time, but I've been forced to, as many of us have, really learn the benefits of it in the past 3 months. I mean, I was certainly connected to it before then, but there is this new awakening and this reality that we are all experiencing, that we can be connected and work with each other from great distance. And that is, in some ways, really exciting. And so how are we doing it? We're doing it through conversations like this. We're doing it through this digital gateway that's allowing us to see each other's faces and hear each other's voices. And there's going to be more and more and more of that. So I think we all would benefit from focusing acutely on providing the best representation of who we are and what we do in these digital assets. Absolutely important for brands to be thinking about telling their story, synthesizing who they are, what they do, where they do it, how they do it, into, you know, accessible amounts of data, words, images, and video content. I think that's very important. And certainly things like Instagram, which, you know, can be the bane of everyone's existence because it can eat up hours and hours of your day, but it's definitely a way to that people are using to find and discover new brands and stay connected, and all of that is going to be important and continue to be moving forward.
Okay, Jessie, so do you think it's going to be then a sort of a symbiotic situation from bricks and mortar through the digital and vice versa, that it'll be a seamless story going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how seamless it'll be because people are going to find their way through it and figure it out. But I think those who are doing it really well create a seamless experience. Sometimes it's just about breaking the rules a little bit and being willing to think a little differently about the way that you do business. I think that there are some stores that will, you know, we had, I received word from a retail partner of ours that's a brand and also had physical stores in 2 US cities, and also advocates for a lot of brands that they carry within their store that are not their own brand, that is, you know, shutting down their physical brick and mortar stores and going online exclusively. And, you know, there will be some of that, certainly. I think that store, being in New York City, is particularly challenged because New York City rents are absurd, and landlords are not really moving in a positive direction on that stuff. But I think that's another reason why I think in the States you'll see more and more stores that are opening up outside of cities, outside of major cities, and people are moving away a bit. So yes, finding a way to communicate what your physical space is like, and imparting that experience digitally, and doing a little bit of both, being retailers who might now do half their business online and half their business in store, which is very different than, you know, what it looked like a year ago, when maybe 15 to 20% of people who even had a digital platform, maybe 15 to 20% of their business was typically done through that. It's going to change, it's going to morph. So you have to concentrate on both simultaneously. And I think as makers of product, you need to do the same, because you're not going to see buyers for a while with the same consistency that you did physically. And you yourself as brands may not be traveling as much as you once did. So the ability to tell your story through digital assets is critical.
I think, Jessie, one of the other things that you touched on that really rang home was the fact that that opportunity that arises with this enforced pause that we've had, that COVID has been, from talking to makers at this end, there definitely seems to have been a creative burst from an awful lot of people where they've had time to sit back and reevaluate and sometimes just get back to making for the love of making, because there really was not an awful lot else to do in some cases. And obviously with that, there comes the challenges of, okay, now I have to get my head back into business now that things are waking up, for want of a better word. But that opportunity of bringing new product to market at the moment, when the market is in such flux, is on one level there's an opportunity, on another level for makers it's quite scary. Have you any advice around that?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we really liked the idea of being able to introduce product year-round through this platform, because throwing all of your energy into maybe 2 trade shows a year, bulking up, making sure that you had X dozen new products to show at any given time, making sure that you had the materials and the production to back it up, depending on how you do your production. If you're making it in advance and planning to ship people things that they've ordered quickly at shows, that's a lot of pressure. And I think that, among the brands that I work closely with, among the brands that I design for, and certainly the brands that we represent, we are much more willing to have tighter product introductions, not feeling like it has to be such a massive new group of product every season, but we're also really inspired by the opportunity to introduce something new when it's ready. You don't necessarily have bursts of creativity just around these trade show schedules. If you want to put something new out into the world in the middle of a season when normally there aren't any trade shows, you should be able to share that digitally through an e-blast that you share with your existing customer base, or through launching an image of something new that just came out of the kiln if you're a ceramicist, in a new color that you decided to introduce through Instagram, or through an e-commerce wholesale platform like Shop On, where you have access to your own dashboard and can upload new products all the time. And then we can, in turn, add editorial stories that will drive people to those new products throughout the year, which is part of the goal, to make this experience of the wholesale world feel a little bit more like the experience that we all have now as consumers, where we're used to finding and discovering things at any time of day, any time of the year. And so the ability to do that digitally for discovery, not necessarily to replace the ways in which we shop and engage, because I think for me, the goal is still to get out there and get into as many individual stores as possible, but to be able to provide that sense of discovery and new introductions on a more regular basis is key. We might refer to them as drops of product, something, brand new that isn't necessarily a massive collection. Maybe it's a smaller production run. Maybe it's a special limited edition. Maybe there's just something about the way that it's packaged, or the way that it's signed, or the way that it's constructed that's a little different. But being able to keep your brand and your product out there and on people's minds throughout the year on a more regular basis, and to do it thoughtfully, not to inundate people with like gobs of information, because we're all inundated, but little selective, well thought out introductions throughout the year is something that we're really excited about being able to do through this platform.
And then the other thing that I found reassuring to hear from you is that an awful lot of makers here in Ireland, as you rightly say, would look at the States and think, oh my God, it's huge. I'm not even going to think about that market because it's too big. The stores are too big. I don't know enough about them. It's just this entity that is too enormous to think about. And they maybe sit back and say, okay, well, I'll wait till I'm bigger. But from what you're saying there, actually, it's really not about that. It's about finding your niche in that bigger market. And actually, when you get there, that niche can be quite small.
Yes, and I think that unless you spend a lot of time here, probably the stores that you're familiar with by name are not the right customers for you. If they're big enough to be known internationally, they might just be too big. There are so many really exquisite, wonderful independent shops that are supported by their communities, that are doing really high quality stuff, and that are now maybe going to be more familiar to those a little further afield. So many of the younger businesses that are launching are being launched with digital as a clear element of their platform from the get-go. Some of the really savvy retailers are using things like Instagram and their digital assets through their websites from the start with as much focus as they would put into their physical spaces. And those stores are going to be recognized and shopped by people much further afield than maybe a more traditional store that is in a town and really just knows their local customer really well and buys for their local customer, knows that, Mrs. Wilson really is into whatever she's into, and they see something and they bring it in for her. So I think that, it's important to recognize that the biggest stores are often the ones that are most challenged right now. I mean, they're a house of cards. Department stores are basically existing by a thread in the States. That world just doesn't really work very well anymore. Specialty chains are often, trumped up by all kinds of complicated loans that could fall apart at any moment. And I think that's something that we're recognizing these days. But there are lots of really wonderful, great independent stores that are probably the better bet. And those are the people you need to find and connect with. And you've got to pick the right place to do it.
Great. And so obviously, I mean, Shop Object is a great starting point for that, because I mean, it's without a doubt like-minded people there. Retailers, as you say, that are often independent or, a little bit left of center, very design oriented, and they're open to the types of products that a lot of our clients are making. For those of our clients who aren't yet ready to even get to that point, obviously there's a lot they can do online in terms of still researching those type of retailers, would you think?
Yes, and if you, one thing that I think is often helpful is to direct message retailers through their Instagram. If you send a direct message with a link to your website and say, something real, like you really like their store, maybe tell them what it is you like about it and why you think your product might be a good fit for them. There's nothing worse than getting a message where it's clearly, a form letter that's being sent out to many people. I get so many messages for Shop Object where someone's saying, I really like your store and I'd love you to carry my product. Well, Shop Object is not a store, it's a trade show. So clearly that person is not necessarily doing the work to send that direct message to me. But if you really do want to make a personal connection, buyers are going to be excited to have you reach out to them and have you share what it is about what they do that you appreciate and why you think that connection might be there. I mean, you might not always make the connection and it might not always work out, but it's worth a try. I think that's a good way to do it. Trade shows are clearly an important aggregate. It is a space for you to see and engage with a large pool of people at a specific time. So that's very meaningful. And again, what we try to do is really just narrow the focus so that we're putting like-minded people together so that there's the best chance for real business to develop there. But if that's not something you're up for or ready for, I do feel like the digital platform for us is something that we imagine being open, particularly now to more and more international brands that are not going to be traveling to the States to do a physical show this season and possibly next as well. You know, the digital platform is there for more brands than we can in the physical space. Our physical show has limitations. We're filled to the gills. We have hundreds of brands that have applied that are great, really quality products and brands and makers of things that might be categories that we have a lot of within the show already, or we just don't have the physical space for. But we can give room to those brands on the virtual site. And so that's an opportunity to reach more people that way. But yeah, I mean, I would say that if you don't feel ready to participate in an online e-commerce marketplace or a physical trade show outside of, you know, Ireland at this point, doing the research and finding retailers that you're really excited by, that you feel like your product would fit well with, you just have to reach out to them individually. I think that's probably the best bet.
Great.
Okay, we have lots and lots of thank yous here. You know, thank you very much. Hugely interesting. Really enjoyed today's talk. Thank you again. Super full of information. And I have one that I think we'll finish on. And the person describes it as a basic question. So here we go.
Those are the hardest.
Pardon?
Those are the hardest.
No, I would say this is a fairly finite answer to this one. What is the cost to be on the platform? And when are you taking applications?
Oh, I see. We're taking applications now. We began by sharing it with existing brands. We will soon be, you can actually, if you click on Shop Object's website and you go to exhibit, the option to do virtual or to apply for virtual, it's still curated, so there's a vetting process, but will be one of those options. The price is $2,500 per season. That is the virtual show, which is 4 days of constant engagement and editorial and talks and connection and all of that, as well as the full 6 months of the marketplace, which is open 24/7. And there will be lots of things to drive traffic to brands throughout that 6-month period. It's a full e-commerce platform. People can shop, can transact. There are no additional fees. There's no percentage of sale that's taken by Shop Object. The money goes straight to the brand, so people can place orders and buy product and replenish product through the platform. There's no limit to the amount of products that you can have there. Each brand has a public-facing profile, so that consumers, we have so many consumers that come to Shop Object that are just excited to discover things, but are not necessarily retailers themselves. So there will be a consumer-facing part of this where you can just go to the website, you can read all of the editorial, you can see all the content that's being delivered each day during the show, and then you can go discover brands through their public profile, which will include the opportunity for there to be a video component, an ethos description of the brand, and maybe half a dozen images of like core products without pricing. And then if you want to click forward as a registered buyer who has, you know, a registration code to begin shopping and building orders and having dialogue with brands directly through chat and making appointments through the program, etc., then you log on to the platform and shop that way. So that's we look at it as two things. There's the virtual trade show and the full-time marketplace, and they both fall under Shop On, and it's $2,500 per season.
And I have to say, Jesse, that the mix of those two things makes it quite unique. We've seen other platforms where it's more focused on that longer term, can, you know, kind of start the dialogue, take the orders, blah, blah, blah. But this idea of an actual virtual 4 days where there's interaction, there's talks, there's, you know, it really is very exciting to see that, because it will be missed so much. So it gives that opportunity for conversation, and then having the follow-up 6 months or whatever it is to build on those relationships makes it, you know, it's something that seems very real, which is a great thing in terms of an online platform. So well done to you guys bringing it to market so quickly.
Thank you so much.
Jesse, all I can say is thank you so much We really appreciate it. I'm not going to be too corny and say we're so glad you made it, and all the permutations of we're so glad you made it, so glad you makers made it, etc. But I'm delighted that we had a lovely audience today. Nicola, thank you so much for your support. And with that, we wish you, Jessie, all the best. I'd say some of our colleagues will be getting in touch with you in the near future. And thank you for that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was really, really a pleasure. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.